it appears that there is a proposal to switch over to a directly elected executive system, a system of separation of powers like in the United States. If that is true, I wholeheartedly welcome that. If it is done properly, that will solve many of our problems in our democracy. Today, vote buying has become almost universal in many states. While some states still they are exempt from vote buying, in most states, enormous amount of money is spent for vote buying, and if any party or individual candidate says that I will not buy the votes, in 99 out of 100 cases, that person cannot get elected. That's not what democracy is meant for. The reason why vote buying has become so endemic is the people who are seeking legislative office, MLA or MP, they are not seeking to be legislators and lawmakers or people to hold the government to account. They are seeking a share of the executive power, because in our system, the legislature, the assembly or parliament and the government are fused completely. Only a majority in assembly or parliament decides the government, and people want governmental power. And because governmental power is treated as very important in this country, there is enormous stake involved and therefore vote buying. Whereas in a direct election to the head of the government at the state or national level, there are two reasons why vote buying will come down. The first is a legislator cannot have any say in the executive, in government. The government is separate, there is a separation of powers. A legislator is limited to lawmaking and accountability. He cannot directly or indirectly exercise executive power, and he cannot become a minister. Therefore, the incentive to buy votes disappears. And the executive, once the election of the executive for the whole state or for the whole country, dependence on vote buying is foolish. The risk is very high. It's all on an election. If you are not elected after spending tens of thousands of crores, you are finished. Instead, they will depend on the individual leader's credibility, stature, past record and the agenda, not on money power. Therefore, the incentive will be altered. The second reason why a direct election of the executive will help the country is, right now our talent is very limited in government. That's why many competent leaders, respected leaders are chosen through the upper house at the national level. Look at late Arun Jaitley. Look at Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister of India today. Look at the external affairs minister, Jaishankar. They are all needed for the country, but they are all taken only through the upper house, because increasingly getting the competent and honest people elected through lower house is very difficult in India for the reasons we stated. And in many posts, because you have to draw ministers essentially from the parliament, it is the parliamentary numbers that dictate the government composition. Competence in government is not the criteria. Whereas in a presidential system or in the state where the executive is directly elected, the elected governor in the state or the president in the country will appoint the cabinet from the country, not from the parliament. Parliament is separate from the government. The best people who can govern well, in the light of the policies of the leader, obviously they have to conform to the policies of the leader on the basis of which he or she is elected. But to execute the policies, to implement the policies, they can pick up the best people, best brains in the country, the experts in various areas, the people with credibility and competence, known record of service and success. They can be ministers in the cabinet, unrelated to electoral politics. The third reason why the presidential system will work better is, today on a day-to-day basis, there is an Ayaram Gayaram culture. The government's survival depends on legislative majority. Look at Karnataka. Look at Tamil Nadu until recently. Look at the national level in many cases when there is no stability of government. You don't know when the government will survive, when the government will fall. A lot of energy of the government is only spent on survival, not on governance, not on improving the conditions of the country. In a directly elected executive, the executive will not depend on the legislative majority for survival. Therefore, you can actually focus on governance. And the day-to-day interference of the MLAs and MPs in government will disappear. Today, if you do not oblige them, the MLAs and MPs, any government will be in trouble, because you survive on the majority of the assembly or parliament. You don't survive on your own mandate. You derive an indirect mandate through MLAs and MPs. Whereas in a direct election, You derive mandate directly from the people. You survive on your own steam. You don't depend on the MLAs or MPs. Therefore, the day-to-day interference in contracts, tenders, police cases, transfers, postings, licenses, a whole lot of other things, that will disappear. The government will not have to oblige them. The government will survive. And the assembly or parliament also will be independent. They are not afraid of the leader in the government. They are elected on their own. They cannot be dismissed, or the assembly or parliament cannot be prematurely dissolved. They will have their own term, just as the elected president and elected governor will have their own term. And there will be a competition between them. And therefore, the assembly or parliament will have a desire to hold the government to account. In order for this system to work, it must also happen in the states, because the real challenges of governance are in states. And two, the whip in the assembly or parliament must disappear, because if you now control through party leaders what they vote, there cannot be accountability of government. And three, crime investigation, even now in the current system, also must be made independent but accountable, must not be politically controlled. And now that this change is contemplated, we must make sure that the crime investigation is completely outside the vagaries of politics and under judicial supervision or some other mechanism, is accountable but independent in functioning. If you do these things, and if you also allow the local governments to flourish, amend suitably the constitutional provisions 73rd and 74th amendments, Article 243, so that genuine local governments can come into effect without over-prescribing the structure, giving enough flexibility to states, then the country will be on a path to prosperity. Many of the political crises that we see, the failure of democracy, distortions of democracy we see, the corruption, vote buying, and the kleptocracy and plutocracy that we see, they will all disappear if we structure it properly. We must do it in the right manner, and we must not have again dual centers of power. If we have a direct election for the president in the country as head of the government, then there is no reason to go by the French model of again a parliamentary system of a prime ministerial government, because there will be only needless confusion, and that will completely negate all the advantages of the presidential system, because vote buying will continue, the day-to-day interference of the MLAs and MPs will continue, the question of competence in cabinet, that will still be a problem, because you have to draw the cabinet only for the parliament. Therefore, that's a bad idea. A good idea is follow broadly the American model, both at the national level and in states, and strengthen the instruments of unity of the country, and strengthen the instruments of federalism and accountability in the country, and make sure the crime investigation is independent but accountable, and make sure that there is no whip applicable in the legislature, so that the legislature can act as a safeguard against executive excess. If we do it right, the separation of powers doctrine, if it's implemented properly, then India will be better off as a democracy, our economy will prosper, our governments will be much more honest and competent, and there will be greater respect and credibility of the political process. Right now, the political process is losing credibility in the country and legitimacy in the country. That legitimacy and respect will be restored. So I hope all parties will sit together. Don't make it a partisan issue. Look at the country's long-term interests and design the model in a manner that the country ultimately is better off and democracy becomes stronger, more vibrant and more honest and accountable.